If you will get out of your bulletins your study guide for today, we're starting a new series this Sunday called The Struggle with Confidence. And I want us to think a little bit about this human struggle that's in all of us about having confidence. We're in an interesting time in our country with the elections coming up, and as I see it, every candidate is trying to convince us that they have confidence, that they have experience and skills necessary to get us out of a kind of a mess we find ourselves in. But for me, all this overbearing posturing and confidence, can I be frank, just kind of makes me sick. I mean, there are times where I just can't watch these people one more time on the news, on the internet, on the radio. I have to get some distance and relief from all this overbearing confidence that seems to be just spewed our way. By the way, did you know that the number one thing that a woman is looking for when she's looking to court a man is confidence? Now think about this for a minute. It's not money. When someone is living with authentic confidence, when they can look you right in the eye when they're talking with you, when they have this conviction that whatever life throws at them, they can handle it. They're willing to take risks. They're willing to run through challenges. Authentic confidence is compelling, isn't it? And it causes you to have faith and trust in that person. And in some cases, they can give you confidence that you didn't have. It can rub off on you. But it can't just be this political posturing that we see on the media every day. They have to be able to back up their confidence as they speak the truth as they know it in a very gracious and transparent way. For me, this happened a number of years ago when I suddenly suffered a ruptured cornea in my right eye. And I went to TW Hospital in D.C. and had a procedure done to basically replace the cornea, and the cornea rejected. And they said, well, we're going to have to try to do it again. And I said, this has been, an incredible task. I'm going to get a second opinion. And I drove up to Baltimore and went to Johns Hopkins Hospital. And I conferred with the guy who was the head of the eye center there. And I said, what's really going on here? Should I have this done again at GW, or should I come up here? And he said, well, we can do it for you, and I think we have a better success rate, and one of my surgeons that works under me will do the procedure, and we'll see if we can get this next transplant to take. And I said, no offense, Doc, but rather than have one of your minions, you're the guy. I would rather have you. I mean, when I sit out in the waiting room, your name is on the wall. This place is named after you. I said, I have confidence if you'll do the surgery that I stand a better chance. And he said, okay. I just recently got word that he retired. But that second transplant took. And I'm doing pretty good with it. Not 100% still, but doing pretty good with it. Listen, life can be hard, can't it? And because Jesus said that in this life, every single one of us is going to experience some trouble, for many of us, we feel like the confidence that we once had gets diminished over time. That life literally beats the confidence out of us at times. And then what happens is the evil one will come and whisper to you things like, you're not going to make it. You can't do this. You don't have what it takes. And in turn, that makes you less joyful in your daily life. It makes you, listen, less generous with others. It just kind of sucks the life right out of you. It makes everything that you have to tackle in life seem harder. It's harder to do normal things. It's harder to perform well at work. So the natural question is, where can we get confidence when we're lacking that? Because we'd all rather live with confidence, wouldn't we? Now, if you had to name someone who had genuine confidence, who would that be? Well, some might say sports names like Tom Brady. He's a pretty confident guy, right? And ladies, he's rich and good looking too. He's married. To a supermodel. Point. He's won more than one Super Bowl. I mean, he can pretty much call the shots, right? With the Summer Olympics on TV this week, you might pick any one of a number of athletes competing for gold medals in their sport. Michael Phelps, from our own native Baltimore, has confidence that he can and will win in Rio this week. And he's not a bad-looking guy either, ladies, right?
He marries too.
He's also married. Did you know that Michael Phelps is the most decorated Olympic athlete of all time? 22 medals to his credit. But in 2014, with all of that success behind him, he almost committed suicide. In an article that I read just last night, he said, "I was a train wreck. I had no self-esteem, no self-worth. I was immersed in alcohol and drug use." He said, "I just wanted to die." But when his longtime friend, NFL star Ray Lewis, came to his Baltimore home for a visit, Ray's a Christian, by the way, he told Phelps this: "This is when we fight. This is when real character shows up. Don't shut down," he told the swimmer, "because if you shut down, we all lose." And Ray Lewis gave Michael Phelps a book, Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life, as he entered rehab. And Phelps later told the NFL star on the phone, "Man, this book is crazy. I can't thank you enough, man. You saved my life." Ray Lewis gave him confidence that he didn't have. Phelps later told ESPN in an interview that the book, listen to this, turned me into believing that there is a power greater than myself and a purpose for me on this planet. He got out of rehab. He went on to reestablish a relationship with his father, who had left his mom when he was 9 years old. Because he said, "I just can't be at odds with this man any longer." He rebuilt that long-lost relationship with his dad. He got married to his sweetheart. And last year they had a sweet baby boy together. Now, how did this man, who was so full of doubt and lacked self-confidence so much that he considered ending his own life in his bedroom in Baltimore, how did he turn that around? He did it by applying the same scriptural principles that the Apostle Paul made when he wrote to the church at Corinth about confident living. And these are the words that Paul said: "Therefore, we are always confident." Now, I don't believe Paul was just throwing words around loosely here. Think about this. Imagine what it would mean if you could live in confidence every single day of your life. Whether the day was going good or bad. whether you were in a good mood or a bad mood, whether you had difficult tasks ahead, hard circumstances, that in all of those type of situations, you could always be confident. And here's the thing about Paul. He was no Michael Phelps. He never won any gold medals. We don't know for sure what the Apostle Paul looked like, but the oldest description of Paul may have indicated that he was short, bald, and had a hook nose. He didn't have a lot of money. In fact, he had no money. He wasn't famous. He was in prison. He wasn't married to a beautiful wife. He wasn't married at all. He was single. But here's the thing about Paul. He was always confident. But he was not overly self-confident. Remember, this is the human struggle. It's just a natural human tendency for you and I to at times become overly self-confident in ourselves. With Paul, he had enormous confidence, but it was never in himself. It was in God. Therefore, Paul says, we are always confident. But here's the confusing part, folks. This is the same teacher who also says these words, for when I am weak, then I am strong. What? How does that work? When I'm weak, really? Today we're going to take a hard look at this profound truth about being human in God's kingdom. And this truth makes both statements not only possible for you and I, it is the way we should all function if we are followers of the Lord Jesus Christ. Andy Crouch, a modern-day speaker and author, has written a wonderful little book that I recommend called Strong and Weak. In it, Andy talks about how we tend to think of weakness and strength as this continuum where you either have one or the other. Because our society believes that both cannot coexist together. So you're either on one end of the scale or you're on the other end of the scale. And he uses in the book the words vulnerability and authority to make his point. You're either vulnerable or you have authority. And that's the way our culture looks at things. A lot of us think that our confidence would increase if we just had more authority, or more money, or better education, and so on. But in the book, he challenges the reader not to think of it as a single line sliding scale, with being vulnerable on one side and being in control on the other. Instead, Andy says that we should think about this along two continuums, two dynamics that actually create a cross with each other. Now, you can either be high or low in authority, or you can be high or low in vulnerability. And the two can work in tandem, he says. So let's start by looking at the biblical model of authority that man has been given since the beginning of creation. When God created human beings, it says he made us in his image. God actually said to human beings, I want you to exercise authority, dominion. I want you to reign for good, powerfully over the earth, over everything that's out here, like a king, like a queen. I want you to be really high in authority over everything else that I've created. But mixed with all this authority, it says that God made us also to be vulnerable creatures. Let me explain what I mean. The text says, Adam and his wife were both naked, yet they felt no shame. Now, naked is a word for vulnerability, isn't it? If someone today feels vulnerable, they might even say, I felt really naked at that moment. I felt exposed. But what's so interesting about this word is that only human beings can be naked. Have you ever thought about that? We have a small dog in our house, and sometimes he'll wear a harness outside, and sometimes in winter, just to be cute, we'll put a little sweater on her. But when she's running around the house, listen, with nothing on, people don't go, "Oh, look, the dog is naked." And my grandkids could easily say that. Why? Because animals can't be naked. Only people can be naked. Why is it you never see two elephants swimming together? Because between the two of them, they would only have one pair of trunks. I'll be here all week, folks. Remember to tip your waiters. The truth is, elephants don't care if they swim naked, right? So God made us high in authority, but He also made us high in vulnerability. When the greatest human being who ever lived, Jesus Christ, came, though, He was super high in authority, wasn't He? I mean, there wasn't any higher, except for other members of the Trinity. He actually said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." Yet at the same time, He turned out to be the most vulnerable person who ever lived, didn't He? The Bible says He humbled Himself. He took on the form of a servant. He became obedient, even unto death, and that death on a cross. People saw in Jesus more authority than they had ever seen, and they also saw in Him more vulnerability than they had ever seen before. And I believe that Jesus modeled this to reveal to us something very deep about our human condition. Back to the graphic from Crouch's book. The cross graph shows the various models of life that you and I can enter into. If somebody has a lot of authority, but they feel like they're not vulnerable, that moves them into being exploiting of others or oppressive to others. And bullies do this. Tyrants tend to do this. We read about a story just this week in the news. You saw where the mayor of Fairfax City was arrested for doing something that he should not have been involved in. But he felt like he had risen to the top. Like he was invulnerable. Now, if somebody has no authority, but they also don't want to experience any vulnerability, what happens is they withdraw in this continuum graph. They become reclusive. This is exactly how Michael Phelps felt just a few years ago. He felt like public scrutiny over his misdeeds, his drug use, his DWIs, multiple ones, had totally erased his former authority as an Olympic gold medal winner, and he admitted that he just kind of holed up in his bedroom. He didn't want to eat. He didn't want to see anyone. He just wanted to die. Now, this is true of our society too, isn't it? If somebody has very little authority, very little power, little education, little resources, then they are extremely vulnerable, right? And people prey on that, and they suffer because of it. But listen, God's intent for mankind is that we experience great authority, listen, and great vulnerability at the same time. All while being utterly dependent on God, not ourselves. You see, when we look at the humble example of Christ and how He lived His life, and then we apply that to our lives, then human community, the way God intended it, can flourish And the problem that will become very evident as we study this in this series is that, listen, everybody wants to have a lot of authority, but nobody wants to be vulnerable, do they? So let's begin our study by looking at a character in the Bible who wrestled a lot with confidence and authority and vulnerability. Fascinating guy by the name of Jacob. If you will truly listen and take in what we're talking about today, I think that this could be life-changing for you. So please stay with me. His struggle begins even before he's born, the Bible tells us. His mom and dad are Isaac and Rebekah. And they're married for 20 years, but they weren't able to have children. In the ancient world, that's an even bigger deal than it is today. So Isaac prayed for 20 years for his wife to have children. And finally, God moved. She was pregnant. But her pregnancy was painful. So painful, she didn't think she was going to be able to stand it, make it all the way through. And this is where his story starts. The scripture says, when her time to give birth came, sure enough, there were twins in her womb. The first came out reddish, as if snugly wrapped in a hairy blanket. There's a picture for you. Sounds kind of cute, doesn't it? Lumberjack in the making. They named him Esau, which literally means hairy. You know. His brother followed, his fist clenched tight to Esau's heel, and they named him Jacob, which literally means the grabber or the deceiver. The idea here is that all the way back in the womb, little fetal Jacob looks at little fetal Esau and says, wait a minute, he's closer to the exit than I am. He's going to get out first, and that's going to make him the firstborn. And that means he'll become the heir. He'll get the birthright. He'll get the blessing. He'll get all the land and the money. I'll get nothing. He'll be Dad's favorite, and I won't. He'll be number one. I'll always be number two. I can't trust random placement in this uterus or whatever is in charge out there to take care of me. I've got to look out for myself. So I'm going to grab my brother's heel and I'm going to yank him back at the last minute, and then I'll be able to get out of the womb first. And I'll be number one. I'll be the firstborn. But the plan doesn't work. He becomes a little fetal failure. That's right. Say it in concert. Oh. And that's going to haunt him his whole life long. Until one day, it actually saves him. So they're born. The text goes on. The boys grew up. Esau became an expert hunter, an outdoorsman. Jacob, on the other hand, was a quiet man, preferring life indoors among the tents. Esau is like this Michael Phelps character with fur, you know? A lot of testosterone in this guy. And their parents come into play. We're told Isaac, the dad, loved Esau because he loved his game. In other words, he loved the food that he brought into the household because Esau was a hunter. And his dad just loved the fact that he was always coming back with, you know, the latest steak or whatever that he could hunt. Now, as we study the life of Jacob, you may well ask, well, why is God so gracious to Jacob in this story when he gets so much wrong and he has so many bad attitudes? Hear me when I say to you, the Bible is not a story about examples of character virtues. It is a story, a series of stories about God working with real, ordinary, messed up human beings like you and me. And if you don't read the scriptures with that in mind, you're going to tend to miss the importance of the teaching that's within. Here's what I mean. Isaac, on the one hand, is so devoted to God that he literally prays for 20 years for God to allow his wife to become pregnant. Yet, here's the irony, he is so shallow, he plays favorites with his own sons. He loves Esau for this reason, because he brings in great food. He might as well have called him Outback Steakhouse. That's why he loves him the best. But Rebekah, it says, loved Jacob. Why does Rebekah love Jacob the most? Well, the scriptures don't really tell us. So you have to kind of fill in the blanks and use your imagination. He was definitely a mama's boy. While his brother was out doing manly things, he was always inside with mom. Maybe she felt sorry for him. Maybe she loved him more because he was an indoor kid and he was always with her. Maybe it was because she had problems with Isaac and this was her way of getting back at her other son. We don't really know. But whatever the reason, she loved Jacob, but not Isaac. And as Jacob grew up, his identity became, I'm not Esau. Esau is the strong one. Esau is the hunter. Esau is my dad's favorite. You see, one of the problems with confidence is that it is so severely affected by whomever we know doesn't love us. We are built, folks, to be extremely sensitive to rejection, to not being loved. And this is Jacob's identity. I'm the one my father doesn't love. Man, that'll wound you right to the core, won't it? And every one of us knows that feeling one way or another, don't we? I'm the one that my mother doesn't love. I'm the one that my husband doesn't love, or that my wife doesn't love. And it breaks my heart. I'm the one that my daughter doesn't love, that my son doesn't love. And we can't stand that. And it creates turmoil within our hearts. And here's what we start doing. We start thinking to ourselves, you know, if I were only more like Esau. If I only had Esau's body, or Esau's wealth, or Esau's gifts, or his personality, and we carry these wounds, these scars. But listen, we weren't made to be someone else. We were made to be just who we are. If you don't get anything else I say this morning, get this. If God is ever going to really bless you, it will have to be you right there in your life, in your body, with your circumstances, your age, and your situation. That is the only place that God is really going to bless you. Jacob thinks, man, if I were only Esau. And there's always been this struggle between the two of them. Who's going to get the birthright, the blessing? And it's continuing throughout their lives. Then when Isaac is an old man, his senses are failing. He's quite feeble. He doesn't even know who's in the room with him, and he thinks he might be dying. And he says to Esau, his favorite, go kill an animal and make some stew, like, you know, that stew that I love that you make. And then I'll give you the blessing. Now Rebekah, the mom, hears this. She gets her son Jacob, her favorite, okay? And she tells him what's going on. And she says, I'm going to make some stew really fast before Esau can get back. You go into your dad and you pretend to be Esau and you'll get the blessing. You'll get the good stuff. And you should grab it. Because I love you. Jacob responds to his mom, Rebekah, by saying, my brother Esau is hairy and I have smooth skin. What happens if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him. He wouldn't just appear to be tricking him. He would be tricking him, right?
He is tricking.
He is tricking him. He says, I'll bring down a curse on myself instead of a blessing if I'm discovered, you know. Notice, he's not concerned with the ethics of what his mom is proposing. He just doesn't want to get in trouble for it. I don't want to have a curse, he says. And Rebekah's response is interesting. His mother says to him, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Now this tells us something about Rebekah. Go back to those 4 quadrants. Rebekah has a very high sense of authority, but she doesn't want to feel vulnerable at all. She's in a whole different quadrant, isn't she? I mean, they lived in a patriarchal world. Isaac is the dad. He is the one who's supposed to be in charge. But the wife, the woman, in this case, actually has a stronger personality. She actually has the most forceful will. Does that ever happen in marriages? No. It did in this one. Her response to Jacob is, oh yeah, I'm really worried about your dad. He really scares me. Let the curse fall on me, son. We got a plan, let's put it in action. She'll use her authority and her invulnerability to exploit Isaac, to exploit her husband, and to exploit Esau, her other son. And she says to Jacob, just do what I tell you. Now, Rebekah is in the quadrant where oppression and exploitation happens. This is where the lure of a promise comes to us, and we are tempted that we can have all the authority but no vulnerability. Who wouldn't want that? Sounds like a beer commercial to me. And in daily life, you and I experience this temptation all the time. And the danger is, if you bite on the bait that is on that hook, what's usually going to happen is you're going to end up in a whole different quadrant, and you're going to be robbed of all your authority. You might have had some before. It's going to be taken away from you once you're discovered. Andy defines authority in his book as the capacity for meaningful action. Eventually, if you get addicted to anything, if you try to pull some shenanigans with others, your ability to maintain your word, to maintain a decent relationship with others, to be your very best, it starts to erode. And your vulnerability goes up, and you end up with intense suffering. See, this is sin, folks. This is temptation. And it goes way back to the beginning of the Bible in the book of Genesis. It is just like when the serpent came to Eve, and his comment to her was this: if you'll trust me, if you'll disconnect from God, then you will be more like God. You will have high authority, and you will surely not die. You'll have no vulnerability. She listens to him, and she defies God, and of course what ends up happening is the absolute opposite of what she was promised. So temptation, sin, promises all authority and no vulnerability, but ultimately it gives you all vulnerability and no authority. Just ask Michael Phelps. She says to Jacob, you can pretend. You can put on Esau's clothes and you'll smell just like him. We'll put a goat skin on you, and if he reaches out to touch you, you'll feel like you're hairy. You'll feel just like him, you'll talk like him, you'll act like him. So Jacob goes into his dad and acts out the scene just like his mom told him Now I want you to think about his deceptive heart as this transpires. He went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes," Isaac said. Isaac is very feeble and his senses are failing. "Which son are you?" Jacob answered his father. Jacob answered his father, "I'm Esau." And then he adds this phrase, "I'm your firstborn son, Esau." Son number one, the one that you love. And it works. And it fools his dad. Here is the lesson that Jacob learned. Write this down on your notes. That if you cannot get what you want by being who you really are, maybe you can get it by pretending to be who you are not. Maybe if you can't get it by being Jacob, you can just pretend to be Esau. Now let me ask you, how often in this life do we pretend to be someone we are not? When I was growing up, I got pretty good at pretending. Children do. When I was a teenager, I pretended to know a lot more than my dad, even though I knew he knew more than I did. I remember as a young adult pretending to agree with people that deep down I knew I didn't agree with them. Now why? Why would I do something like that? Well, maybe it was because of job security. Or to inflate my ego. Because at times I always would think, if I just show up with just me and who I really am, then I'm not going to get the good stuff. I'm not going to get the respect that I need or deserve. But here's the thing. When Jesus came, with all authority and all vulnerability, he taught us this amazing dynamic where people could just be themselves. They could stop pretending. Tax collectors and Gentiles and prostitutes and lepers. He promoted a life where we could all take off the masks and stop pretending that we were somebody that we're really not. He hated it when people pretended. He actually went after it. He called it hypocrisy. He hated it when people would use faith or God or religion to make other people pretend to be better than they really were. Make them out to be somebody that they're really not. And folks, I'm here to tell you this morning, for Faith Baptist Church to be the community that God wants it to be, we must create an environment where people can come here and just be real. Because real confidence comes so much easier when you're just being yourself and you're not playing a bunch of games. But Jacob doesn't do that. What happens is Jacob ends up getting discovered in his deception. And his brother Esau says, "I'm going to kill him." And I think he meant it. Rebecca hears about this and she says to Jacob, Esau is a hunter. You don't stand a chance, 10 boy. So he runs away from home. At 40 years old, he runs away from home. And he loses everything. In the Bible, in Genesis, anytime somebody goes on a journey like that, most stories you'll see that there's a village and there's some hospitality that's offered to the person as they're fleeing or making their journey. But not with Jacob. The Bible tells us Jacob was all by himself, sleeping alone in the wilderness, putting rocks around his head to protect him in case a wild animal came along. Do you see what has happened? He is now at maximum vulnerability. Then it happens. He has a vision from God. He sees this ladder. Many of us growing up learned the song, Jacob's Ladder. In this story, Jacob is not climbing up to God. Heaven is coming down to Jacob on this ladder. He says, there above it stood the Lord. And he said, I am the Lord. And this is the only time this title is used in the Bible. He says, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. Now, of course, Isaac was Jacob's real dad, but why didn't God say, I am the God of your father? Why did he say, I'm the God of your father Isaac? Well, Isaac was Esau's dad. But Isaac was the father who did not love Jacob. Jacob sort of didn't have an earthly father. And I think this was God's way of saying, I know what you've been dealing with your whole life. The rejection, the feeling unloved, unappreciated, and I care. I'll be your father. I will heal those wounds if you'll let me. Jacob has his very first spiritual awakening. It doesn't solve all of his problems because, frankly, his life was a mess at this point. But what he says is this: surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not even aware of it. God was right here, and he gives it a name. He says, I'm going to call this Bethel, the house of God. Surely this is the gate of heaven. God has come to me, little Jacob, son number 2, the deceiver, the grabber. And I can trust God even when I have bad intentions and I screw up royally. He is with me. Now imagine this. God says, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you and through your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. What? God is going to bless generations of offspring of a dishonest con artist? What kind of a God is this? Now, folks, I'm here to tell you, wherever you are, in the most ordinary place you could be, or the most extraordinary, it's not because you're doing something right. It's because God is with you that you must have confidence in him. You see, he invites Jacob into a life where he could always be confident and flourishing, where he could live with authority as being one of God's children, even though he was, listen, a vulnerable, dependent, finite, sinful little human being. Folks, that is where it is possible to live with genuine confidence. Such an interesting word, isn't it? Confidence. The phi in the middle comes from the Latin, semper fi. Any Marines in the room? What does that mean? Always faithful, right? Listen, what matters most is not how much confidence you have. What matters is what you are putting your confidence in. But here's the struggle. All of us have a few things that we can do on our own, and we do them pretty well, and we know it. I used to be a firearms instructor and an expert marksman when I was a policeman. But I got to tell you, folks, I'm wearing somebody else's cornea these days. And that was some other factors, like some arthritis that flares up in my right hand. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not as good as I once was. But I'm as good once. But here's the challenge for you and I. It's not to rely on what we know that we can have confidence in within ourselves. For some of us, we think we have this huge ability and confidence within ourselves, when what we really have is massive incompetence. Write this down on your outlines. It is better to have a little confidence in the right object than massive confidence in the wrong object. In other words, it's better to have a little confidence in God than massive confidence in yourself. And that's what Paul is writing about, because Paul knows that reliance on yourself is going to get you into trouble one day. yourself is going to take on an enemy that yourself cannot handle one day. Here's what Paul writes. Therefore, he says, we are always confident and know that as long as we are at home in this body, we are away from the Lord. He says, we are confident. There's that word again. I say we would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord. Paul, who is no Michael Phelps, says, you know, when the ultimate enemy, when death comes, I will be confident because my confidence is not in myself. Myself is going to fail. God will never fail me. I did a funeral just this past week for an old friend who grew up with me in a youth group in a small Baptist church in Beltsville, Maryland. We had some great times back in the day. She was a great gal, lived the Christian life well. There were so many testimonies at this memorial service about how she just reached out and helped people and tried to exude the love of God through her daily work as a teaching assistant. One thing I heard at the funeral home that everybody was saying, because she had just posted on Facebook 2 weeks before, that she finally got her diploma. And she said, my mom would have been so proud. Her mom's gone into glory now. She said, my mom would have been so proud. And she was looking forward, instead of just being a teacher's assistant, to actually becoming a teacher for the first time in her life. Just got that degree. Now let me tell you something. No matter how magnificent yourself looks, no matter how educated yourself might be, no matter what kind of great connections yourself has piled up, no matter how impressive a resume yourself has written about yourself, the day is going to come when yourself will go to work, like she did a week from Monday ago, and you're not going to make it home. Or like the father in this story, yourself will become so old and wrinkled and feeble and frail, you won't even know anymore who's in the room. You see, yourself is never going to beat death. I don't care where yourself has been or how strong it has looked over the years. It doesn't matter how connected you are, how bright you are, how smart you are, how pretty you are. It doesn't matter if yourself has won more gold medals than everyone else in the history of mankind. Our confidence is not in anything that we have done. Our confidence is in this and this alone. Our God is able.
Amen.
Our God is able to roll away stones. Our God is able to forgive sinners. Our God is able to give grace. Our God is able to replace despair with hope. Our God is able to make weak hands strong. Our God is able to make the lame leap for joy. Our God is able to bring light into darkness. Our God is able to do immeasurably more than you could ever think or imagine. Our confidence is in God who is able. That has to be where our confidence comes from, folks.
Amen.
And that's why Paul says, therefore, we are always confident. And that's what we're going to learn in this series together. This tremendous adventure that lies ahead. And that's why I want you to think about this saying every day this week. I want you to write it down and make it your motto, your theme for every day this week when you wake up. Write down these words. Always confident. And I want you to practice having confidence in God this week. When you get up in the morning, I want your very first thoughts to be, God, this is you and me facing this day together. And I look forward to that. When I'm with other people, I'll look them right in the eye and be confident that through you, there will be some way for me to actually care for, to help this person, to make a difference in their lives. Listen, if you will do this, you will never again have to worry about God, give me the words. Or how is what I'm saying to them right now coming across? I wonder if they're accepting this. This week, don't compare yourself to anybody else. Not even to Esau. This week, say that this is what you're really going to have, is great confidence and trust that God will work in and through you like that. This week, don't obsess over the broken down car, or the washing machine, or the lack of money to pay bills in your house. Hello? You know, I think it's so interesting that when Jacob had this encounter with God, his response, the very last thing he says is, God, I'm going to tithe everything that I have. Now, how did that happen? I think it happened because he says, now I really trust God. I know that he's watching out for me. And Jacob, the grabber, suddenly became Jacob, the giver. I'm telling you, folks, this can transform your life. So this week, when you go to work, instead of worrying about all the problems and the stuff that you have to figure out, I want you to say, it's God and me together, and together we can do this. Always confident in God. Will you stand, please, for prayer?